The Lost Heir of Rua. A Story of Ireland. Chapter 1. The Fisherman's Gift, the Night of the Storm. The squall that broke over Killary Harbour on the last night of October was the kind that fishermen speak of for a generation. It came without warning. One moment the stars were cold and clear above the Muilrea Mountains, and the next, the sky had sealed itself shut, and the sea was a black field of violence. Boats that had not been hauled above the tide line were gone by morning. Thomas O'Fowline was already ashore when the storm struck. He had pulled his curragh above the rocks just in time and was walking the cliff path home to Killadoon when his lantern caught something in the hollow of a sea-stacked boulder. A bundle of oilskin wedged into the stone as if placed there deliberately, out of the reach of the highest waves. He might have passed it by. A man soaked to the skin by October rain does not go looking for trouble. But the bundle shifted, a small, effortful movement, and Thomas stopped. Inside the oilskin, wrapped further in a length of fine wool far too good for any fishing village, lay a baby girl. She was perhaps 6 weeks old. Her eyes were open, dark and watchful as a seal's, and she made no sound. Around her neck, on a cord of plaited silk, hung a small gold ring set with a piece of dark green Connemara marble, carved into the shape of a running hare. Thomas stood in the lashing rain holding the child and looking out at the heaving black sea, as if answers might come from it. None did. He put her inside his coat and walked home. A daughter of the harbour. His wife Nora had long since given up hoping for children of her own. She took the infant from Thomas's arms without a word, held her to the firelight, examined every inch of her, and declared, "She's healthy, she's hungry, and she's ours until someone proves otherwise." No one ever did. They named her Sorcha, brightness, because even on that black night she had seemed to carry a particular quality of stillness, as if she knew something the storm did not. Sorcha O'Fowline grew up with salt in her hair and fish scales on her hands. She could read the tides before she could read letters. She mended nets with the speed and precision of a woman twice her age. And she had a particular gift, remarked upon by every fisherman on the harbour, for predicting the weather by means nobody could quite explain. She would sniff the air, look at the particular shade of the horizon, and pronounce, "Don't go out tomorrow." They learned to listen. She was different. Everyone knew it, and nobody said it plainly. She was too quick for the village, too still for it as well, full of contradictions that sat easily inside her because she had never known anything else. Nora had told her, on her 16th birthday, about the night of the storm, and the oilskin bundle, and the silk cord, and the ring. Sorcha had looked at the hair ring for a long time. Then she had put it back on its cord, hung it around her neck, and gone down to help her father mend the curragh. "Does it not trouble you?" Nora asked that evening, wondering. "It troubles me less than a torn hull in a rising sea," Sorcha said. "Both need mending. Only one of them is mine to fix." But at night she turned the little marble hair in her fingers and wondered. Departure. When Sorcha was 20, Thomas died, quietly as he had lived, in his own bed with Nora's hand in his. The curragh passed to a cousin who had no need of it, the cottage stood cold and expensive, and Nora's eyesight was failing. There was nothing for it. Sorcha would have to go inland to find work that paid better than mending nets. She walked to Westport in 2 days. She carried the hair ring, a change of clothes, Nora's blessing, and the kind of practical courage that never announces itself. She was not afraid of the world. She had merely not seen much of it yet. She thought little of destiny. She thought of wages, of medicine for Nora's eyes, of whether there would be rain before nightfall. Destiny, as it happened, had been thinking of her for 20 years. Chapter 2. The House Above the Lake, Rua. Rua, the Red Castle, stood on a promontory above Loaf Mask, its stone the colour of dried blood in certain lights and of embers in others. It had been the seat of the O'Mainin family for 4 centuries, and for most of those centuries it had stood for something worth standing for. The present lord was one Eamon O'Mainin, a man of 60 whose grief had quietened him like snow quietens a field, muffling everything without removing it. His wife Myriad had died 9 years ago, leaving him with a daughter, Cleodna, now 18 and fierce as a March wind, and the memory of a son. The son was the grief that snow could not quite cover. His name had been Kiran. He had been taken from the cradle, stolen, Eamon believed, though he could prove nothing, on the very night that his steward had reported the child dead of a sudden fever. The steward's name was Paraik o Treasai, and he had served the family 12 years before that night, and for 12 years afterwards, his face never showing more than the ordinary unhappiness of a careful man. He had retired to a farm near Ballinrobe and died, so far as anyone knew, with a clean conscience. Eamon had never believed him, but belief without proof is only a wound you cannot treat. The one thing Eamon knew with certainty: on the night Kiran was taken, a hair ring of Connemara marble, a piece his own mother had worn, carved by a craftsman in Clifton, had vanished from the cradle with him. The steward's daughter. It was Paraik o Treasai's daughter, Ross, who now managed the affairs of Caslean Rua. She had come to the castle 5 years ago, quiet and competent, speaking little of her father, and had made herself indispensable with such graceful efficiency that by the time anyone thought to question her influence, she had already become the axis around which the household turned. She was 30, dark-haired, with a quality of stillness that people mistook for contentment. In fact, it was control. She monitored the accounts, managed the tenants, handled the correspondence that Eamon found exhausting, and had in the process quietly ensured that the castle's affairs passed through her hands before they reached his. She was not cruel. She was something more dangerous, patient, and she had a plan of such long architecture that she had almost begun to believe it was merely the natural order of things. Her father, before he died, had told her the truth about the night Kiaran O'Mainin disappeared. He had told her in the way that dying men tell things, hoping to be absolved, not yet willing to instruct. But Ross had listened, and understood, and drawn her own conclusions. The child had been given to a couple on the coast, fisher folk, in exchange for a sum of money and their silence. A girl, Paraik had said, with some confusion. He had not been able to explain the error. There had been a dark night, 2 infants, a midwife who spoke little Irish. The wrong child had been handed over. Ross had spent 4 years quietly searching the coast. She had found Thomas O'Fowline's widow in Killadoon, and the widow had told her, without knowing what she was telling, about a daughter gone to Westport. The meeting in Westport. Saoirse had found work easily enough. She was strong, quick, and unafraid of difficult tasks, and had spent 6 months working in a merchant's warehouse by the quay, loading and unloading goods, keeping tally of stock, sleeping in a loft above the rope store. She was saving carefully. She wrote to Nora every week. It was on the quay, on a November morning of hard grey light, that she first saw the woman in the dark green cloak. The woman was watching her with an expression that Saoirse, who was good at reading weather, recognised as a kind of careful calculation disguised as interest. "You're Saoirse O'Fowline," the woman said. It was not a question. "I am, and you're staring at me as if I owe you money." The woman smiled, and the smile was like a window that looked onto a view it was not quite willing to reveal. "My name is Ross o Treasai. I am steward of Caslean Rua, above Lothmask. Lord Eamon O'Mainin is in need of someone who can read, reckon, and keep a calm head when things go badly. I've been told you can do all 3. Saoirse looked at her steadily. "Who told you that?" "People talk in warehouses," Ross said. "Will you come?" Saoirse thought of Nora's failing eyes and the cost of a good physician. She thought of the hair ring under her shirt, cool, unreadable, patient. She thought of the Muilrea mountains above Killary and how they had never yet told her a lie. "I'll come," she said, "for a fair wage, and the right to leave when I choose." "Of course," said Rose, and she meant neither. The Lord and the Lost. Caislean Rua was everything the harbour was not, heavy, inland, still. Saoirse felt the absence of the sea as a constant low note beneath everything else, like a church bell heard across fields. But the work suited her. Eamon's affairs were tangled after years of inattention, and she had a gift for finding the thread that, once pulled, unravelled complexity into sense. Eamon himself surprised her. She had expected a proud and distant lord. She found instead a man diminished by private grief, who sat most mornings in the room where his son had been taken and looked at the lough as if it might eventually offer an explanation. He was kind to his tenants in an absent-minded way, and kinder to his daughter, Cleodna, in a way that was not absent-minded at all. Cleodna took longer to warm to Saoirse, and when she did, it was with the frankness of someone who has considered the matter carefully. "You're different from the others Ross has brought in," she said one evening, sitting on the wall of the kitchen garden while Saoirse turned soil for the spring planting. "Different how?" The others watched Rose for permission before they spoke. "You don't." Saoirse drove the spade into the earth. "Should I?" Cleodna looked at her with her father's grey eyes. "No," she said at last. "I think you probably shouldn't." It was the beginning of a trust that would matter more than either of them knew. Ros watched the friendship form with the attention of a chess player watching an opponent move a piece she had not anticipated. She said nothing. She adjusted her plan. The ring and the recognition. It was Brother Colum who first saw it. Brother Colum was an elderly Franciscan from the monastery at Cong who came to the castle once a month to tend to Eamon's conscience and his library in roughly equal measure. He was 81, nearly blind, and had a memory of absolute and unsettling precision. He was shuffling through the library one afternoon when Saoirse came to return a volume, and the afternoon light caught the cord around her neck and the small green shape hanging from it. He stopped. He held out a hand that trembled slightly. "Child," he said, "may I look at that?" Saoirse lifted the cord over her head and placed the ring in his palm. The old friar turned it. His clouded eyes moved across the carved hair, the plain band, the faint marking on the inside of the shank. 3 small notches, like a tally. His lips moved without sound. Then he looked up at her face, and at her eyes, which were the particular shade of grey that the lough went in winter, and which were the same shade as Eamon O'Mainean's. "Blessed are the patient," he said softly, "for they shall eventually lose their patience and have to act." He closed his fist around the ring. "Fetch Lord Eamon. Tell him Brother Colum has found something his prayers have been circling for 20 years. The recognition in the great hall was not what songs would later make it. There was no dramatic declaration. Eamon took the ring from Brother Colum's hand, and the colour left his face as if the tide had gone out. He sat down slowly. He looked at Saoirse for a long time, at the line of her jaw and the set of her eyes, and the way she stood with her weight balanced, ready, the way a person stands when they have spent their life on moving boats. "My mother's ring," he said at last, very quietly. "She wore it until she died. I put it in Ciaran's cradle myself. The morning he was taken, it was gone." Saoirse sat across from him, the ring back in her own hands. She did not feel what she had expected to feel. She was not sure what she had expected. Something like grief for the life she might have had, perhaps, or joy at the life she might now claim. Instead, she felt only the particular clarity that comes when a complicated thing becomes simple, the tide going out to reveal what has always been on the seafloor. "Tell me about Ciaran," she said, and Eamon, who had not spoken the name aloud in 9 years, told her. Chapter 3. The Steward's Long Game. What Ross Knew. Ross O'Treasai had known since the moment she hired Saoirse that she was bringing the castle's true heir across its own threshold. She had known, and she had done it deliberately, and she had a reason. Her plan was not simple. It never had been. The years she had spent making herself essential to Caislean Rua were not years spent in pursuit of the estate itself. She was too practical for that kind of naked ambition. What she wanted was the thing the estate represented. Safety, permanence, the end of the precariousness that had defined her family since her father's one terrible decision. Parik had accepted money to give away a child. That money was spent long ago. What remained was the debt, not financial, but moral, and the knowledge that the debt could surface at any time and destroy everything she had built. Her plan had been this: find the heir, bring her to the castle under a pretense, and when the recognition came, as she calculated it must, position herself as its architect. The loyal steward who had spent years searching, who had finally, through dedication and care, reunited the family. A version of the story that made her not the daughter of a criminal, but the instrument of justice. Aemon, grateful, would keep her. The debt would dissolve in gratitude. It was a good plan. It had one flaw. She had not accounted for Cleodna. The missing letters. Cleodna had been suspicious of Ross for 3 years before she had anything specific to be suspicious about. It was Saoirse's arrival that gave her a direction for her instinct. She began, quietly and methodically, to look. She found the first letter in Rose's private correspondence box, which she accessed with a key borrowed from the household ring while Ross was away at the Ballinrobe market. It was a letter from a solicitor in Galway City, discussing, in careful and oblique language, the disposition of certain assets in the event of a change in the family's circumstances at Caislean Rua. The assets in question amounted, when Cleodna worked through the numbers, to roughly 1/3 of the estate's value. She found the second letter behind a loose stone in the chimney breast of Rose's room. A letter in her father's hand, addressed to Ross, written in the week before he died. She read it twice, folded it precisely along its original creases, and went to find Saoirse. "I need to show you something," she said, "and I need you to read it without telling me what to feel about it." Saoirse read Parik O'Treasai's letter. It was not a confession, precisely. Dying men rarely manage the grammar of true confession. It was more an account, or an explanation, offered to his daughter as both apology and instruction. It described the night he had handed a child to a fisherman on the Killary coast. It described the sum he had received. It named the man who had paid him. It was not Conall O'Meinin or any other family member. It was a land agent named Fogarty who had acted, he claimed, on behalf of a Dublin lawyer whose client Parik had never met. The entire theft had been engineered by a stranger for reasons that the letter did not make clear, and the money had changed hands twice before it reached Parik. "Someone wanted your father's heir removed," Cleodna said. "We still don't know who." "But Rose does," Saoirse said, "or she knows more than she's told us." The confrontation. They did not go to Aemon immediately. Saoirse argued, successfully, that Aemon would act on emotion rather than strategy, and that Ross, warned by any change in behaviour, might destroy what evidence remained. Instead, they gave Ross 1 more week, and they watched her. What they saw disturbed Saoirse more than the letter had. Ross was sending messages. 3 riders in 4 days, each departing at odd hours, each heading south. Seamas, the under-steward who had served Aemon faithfully for 15 years, intercepted one. It was addressed to the Galway solicitor, and it contained 4 words that required no interpretation. "The matter has changed." "She knows we're watching," Cleodna said. "She knew before we started," Saoirse replied. "She's been 3 steps ahead of everyone in this castle since she arrived. The question is whether she thinks she's still ahead of us now. She was not. They chose a Sunday, when the household was at Mass and the castle was quiet, and they laid the letters on Eamon's desk alongside Seamus's account of the intercepted message and a careful written summary of everything they had observed and concluded. Eamon read it all before they said a word. His face went through several expressions and settled on something that was not anger. It was closer to the look of a man who has found the bottom of a well he had been falling through for years. "She found Saoirse for me," he said at last. "She found me for herself," Saoirse said, "to spend a debt she owed before it spent her." Eamon was quiet for a long time. "And who paid my steward to give away my son, my daughter?" He stopped and started again, more carefully. "Who paid Pariac to give away my child?" "That," said Cleodna, "is what we need Ross to tell us. The name in the ledger." They brought Rose in from the garden, where she had been cutting the last of the autumn roses with the calm of someone who has accepted an outcome she cannot change. She looked at the letters on the desk, and then at the 3 faces arranged around it, and for the first time since Saoirse had known her, the careful stillness dropped away. What was underneath it was not guilt, precisely. It was something more complicated. The face of a person who has been waiting a very long time for a particular door to open and is not entirely sorry that it finally has. "My father was a weak man," she said. She sat down without being invited. "He was not a bad man. I want that understood. But he was weak where money was concerned, and there was a great deal of money offered." "Who offered it?" Eamon said. Ross folded her hands. "His name was Ultan Ford. He was a solicitor in Dublin. He is dead now, died 4 years ago, but his practice still exists, and his papers still exist, because I have been careful to ensure that they do." She looked up at Eamon. "I have, in a locked box in my room, copies of the correspondence between Ford and the man who commissioned him. I have had them for 3 years. I intended to use them differently than this. I find I no longer care about the difference." The name she gave them, the name of the man who had paid Ultan Ford to arrange the disappearance of Eamon O'Maineen's infant, was not a stranger. It was Eamon's own cousin, Lorcan O'Maineen, who lived in comfort in a house near Tuam, and who stood, in the absence of direct heirs to Caisleán Rua, to inherit the estate. Eamon said nothing for a very long time. The fire settled in the grate. Outside, the loft was the colour of pewter. "Get the box," he said to Rose. She went. The road to Tuam. Seamus rode to Tuam with 2 men and a letter from Eamon. The letter was not a demand. It was an invitation, composed in the measured language of a man who has chosen procedure over passion. Lorcan O'Maineen was invited to come to Caisleán Rua to answer certain questions of an urgent and familial nature. Lorcan did not come. He sent instead a lawyer and the kind of polished denial that suggested advance preparation, which meant, Seamus reported, that he had known the summons was coming or had been expecting something like it for some time. His countermove was swift and in a way admirable in its boldness. Within a week, a petition had been filed with a Dublin court challenging Saoirse's identity. The petition argued that a foundling raised by fisherfolk, with nothing to her name but a ring that might have come from anywhere, could not legally be established as the heir of a significant estate on the basis of sentiment and an old friar's testimony. It was, the petition concluded, a fabrication designed to disinherit the rightful line of succession. Saoirse read the petition at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold at her elbow. She read it twice, as she had read Pariac's letter, carefully, without hurrying. "He's not wrong," she said. "About the evidence, I mean. A ring and a resemblance. It's not enough for a court." "Then we find more," said Cleodna. "Brother Colum," said Seamus. Saoirse looked up. "What does Brother Colum know that he hasn't told us?" The old friar, it emerged, knew a great deal. Brother Colum's witness. He came to the castle on a Wednesday, travelling by cart because his knees no longer allowed a horse. He sat in the great hall, wrapped in his habit, like a man comfortable in his own ancientness, and he told them what he had been holding in his extraordinary memory for 20 years. He had been at Caeslean Rua on the night Ciaran O'Mainin was taken. He had been there not for Aemon, but for Myriad, who had asked him to baptize the child privately and quietly before the formal ceremony, a common enough request from a woman who had lost 2 previous children and trusted nothing to the delay of ceremony. He had baptized the child. He had written the entry in the monastery's register of private baptisms. The name he had written was Ciaran Aemon O'Mainin. The date, the parents, the witnesses. The description he had added in the margin, as was his habit: dark eyes, quiet, a hair ring of green marble placed by the mother around the child's neck for the ceremony. The register was in the monastery at Kong. It had been there, undisturbed, for 20 years. Saoirse was very still. "You've had this all along." "I've had it," Brother Colum agreed. "I did not know it was needed. I am old, and I live quietly, and news from the outside world arrives slowly. When I saw the ring on your neck, I knew what I had." He paused. "Forgive an old man for not finding you sooner. I'm afraid I assumed God was managing the schedule." Chapter 4. What the Land Remembers. The Court and the Register. The case was heard in Galway City in the early spring, before a judge of considerable reputation and limited patience. Lorcan O'Mainin's lawyers presented their arguments with the smooth confidence of men who had been paid to be confident. They spoke of insufficient evidence, of sentiment dressed as law, of the dangers of disrupting a settled succession on the basis of wishful thinking. Then Brother Colum was helped to the witness stand. He gave his testimony in Irish, which was translated for the record, and he gave it with the absolute precision of a man who has had 81 years to understand the difference between what he knows and what he supposes. He knew the date, he knew the names, he knew the ring, he knew what he had written, and the monastery register was produced, and what he had written was in it, exactly as he had said. He was asked whether he was certain. He said he was. He was asked whether his memory at his age could be trusted. He paused for a long moment and then said, with the mild authority of someone who has spent his life in the company of truth, "I have forgotten many things in 81 years. I have never, to my knowledge, invented one." The court accepted the register. The petition collapsed. The lawyers for Lorcan O'Mainin withdrew to reconsider their position, which they would reconsider for some months before ultimately conceding. Saoirse left the courthouse into a soft Galway rain that felt, after the close air of the courtroom, like a benediction. Cleodna took her arm. Seamus walked 3 paces ahead with the register wrapped in oilskin under his arm, as if it were something fragile and miraculous, which perhaps it was. "How do you feel?" Cleodna asked. "Like someone who has just mended a hull," Saoirse said, "relieved it's done, uncertain about the next sea." Ross. The question of Ross ó Treasai was the one Saoirse found most difficult. Legally, the woman had done nothing wrong. She had concealed knowledge of her father's crime rather than suppressing it, and she had, ultimately, produced the evidence that broke Lorcan's case. Morally, she had manipulated Saoirse and exploited Aemon's grief in service of her own protection. Both of these things were true, and they did not resolve each other. Saoirse asked to speak with her alone, which surprised everyone, including Ross. They met in the library in the late afternoon, with the lough going gold outside the window. "You could have told my father the truth when you arrived," Saoirse said. "You had the letters." "I could have," Ross agreed. "I was afraid of what he would do with them, and I was afraid," she added, with the honesty of someone who has nothing left to protect, "of what he would do with me." "Were you wrong to be afraid?" Ross considered this carefully. "No, I was right about the fear. I was wrong about almost everything else." Saoirse was quiet for a moment. The fire breathed. The loft went dark. "My father," Saoirse said, "is going to ask me what should happen to you. I would like to be able to tell him something other than nothing." "Whatever you think is just," Rose said. "I think," Saoirse said slowly, "that someone who has spent 5 years learning every corner of this estate's business should not waste that knowledge. There is a village near Kong whose accounts have not been properly managed in a decade. The people there need someone capable and honest." "Honest," she repeated with a precision that was not unkind. "From now on." Ros looked at her for a long time. "That is more generous than I deserve." "It's not generosity," Saoirse said. "It's practical, and it means I'll know where you are." For the first time since they had met, Ros smiled without anything behind it. "Lorcan." Lorcan O. Mainin did not come to Caislean to face what he had done. His lawyers communicated on his behalf, and the communication was characterized by the language of legal necessity rather than personal accountability. He settled the matter with money, a substantial sum paid to the estate, and withdrew from public life in the way that men of his type withdraw, loudly, with grievance, in the direction of somewhere else. Eamon bore this without visible anger, which Saoirse found more impressive than any show of fury would have been. He had been a man diminished by grief. He was becoming a man clarified by it. "He was my father's nephew," Eamon said one evening, standing at the window above the loft. "I played with him as a boy. He would have been welcome here, always, for nothing more than the asking. He could have come to any dinner, and any harvest, and any celebration this castle ever held." He was quiet for a moment. "It is strange what a man will do for the prospect of a thing he might have had simply by being decent." "It is," Saoirse agreed. "Are you angry with him?" She thought about it. "I'm angry on your behalf," she said. "On my own. I keep thinking of Tomas pulling his curragh above the tide line in a storm and finding me in the rocks, and I can't quite get past the fact that whoever sent me there, however it happened, I ended up with people who were good to me. It's hard to sustain much rage when the story turned out better than it had any right to." Eamon looked at her. "You are very like your mother, I'm told." He paused. "I didn't know her long. She died when you were 3 months old. But those who knew her say she had the same quality, of seeing what is there rather than what should be there." Saoirse felt the familiar weight of the hair ring beneath her shirt. She said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. What Nora Said? Brigid came to Caislean in May, which was the right month for it. The light was honest, and the hills were the green that is almost implausible, and the loft was behaving itself. Saoirse had sent a cart for her because her legs were not what they had been, and Nora had refused the cart the first 2 times it was offered, and then accepted it with the air of someone who had always intended to. She sat in the great hall and looked around at the stone and the banners and the light coming through the high windows, and then she looked at Saoirse, who was standing in the middle of it all with the particular alertness of someone in an unfamiliar element, competent but watchful. "Well," Nora said. "Well," said Saoirse, "it's a great big drafty place." "It is. The east wing is particularly bad." "You've colour in your face." "I've been working in the gardens. There's a wall that needed repointing." Nora snorted. "Lord of the estate and repointing walls." "The lime is good for the hands," Saoirse said, and grinned, and sat down beside her on the bench, and for a while they were simply a mother and daughter in a large room, which is one of the oldest and most sufficient of all possible conditions. Later, walking in the garden, Nora said, "Are you happy?" Saoirse considered the question with the care it deserved. "I am becoming something," she said. "Whether that's the same as happy, I'm not sure yet. Ask me in a year." Nora took her arm. "Your father would have liked this place." "He would have liked the loft," Saoirse said. "He'd have wanted to fish it by the second morning." Third morning, Nora said firmly. He had manners. They walked on, arm in arm, in the Maylight, and Kaislian Rua held them the way old walls hold everything, without preference, without judgment, with the simple patience of stone that has seen worse and endured. The new steward. Seamus was appointed steward of the castle in the full and proper sense, a title he had functionally held for years and had never thought to claim. He accepted it with the gruff brevity of a man who considers dignity to reside in the work rather than its acknowledgement. He and Saoirse developed a working rhythm that those around them would later describe as efficient to the point of alarm. He knew the land. She knew numbers. He knew the people. She knew how to listen to them. He remembered what the estate had been. She could see what it might become. Between them, they made decisions that were both rooted and forward-looking, which is the only kind of decision an old estate can survive. Cleodna took charge of the correspondence and the tenants' affairs and proved, to the surprise of no one who had paid attention, to have an extraordinary aptitude for both. She approached each problem with the same cool directness she had shown in the kitchen garden, identifying what was actually there rather than what was expected to be there, and dealing with it accordingly. "You were born for this," Seamus told her once. "So was Saoirse," Cleodna said. "We were both just born in the wrong place and had to find our way here." He considered this. That might be true of most people who end up where they should be. The marble hair. On the first anniversary of Saoirse's recognition, Éamon asked her to walk with him to the lough at evening. It was October again, the same month in which Thomas ó Fáileinn had found her on a stormy cliff path, and the light over the water was the precise amber of a turf fire in a dark room. He had something in his hand, a small carved object of dark green Connemara marble. Not the hair ring she wore, a companion piece, a larger carving, a hare at full stretch with its ears laid flat. "This was your mother's," he said, "made by the same craftsman. She kept them together, the ring for wearing and this for holding. I've kept it since she died." He put it in Saoirse's hands. "I don't want to keep it any more. It's been kept long enough." Saoirse held the small hair in her cupped palms. It was warm from his pocket, the particular warmth that objects acquire from long proximity to a living body, the warmth of being held rather than stored. "Tell me about her," Saoirse said. They sat at the lough's edge until the light was fully gone. Éamon talked about Mairead, not the formal memories that people produce when asked, but the living ones, the way she had sung off key without embarrassment, the argument she had won about which field to drain first that had proved her absolutely right, the exact way she had laughed when something genuinely amused her, which was often. Saoirse listened and said little. The hair sat in her hands. The lough went dark around them. When Éamon finally fell quiet, it was not the quiet of grief, but the quieter quiet of someone who has spoken a thing out of themselves and found that the speaking has made it lighter. "She would have liked you," he said at last. "I hope so," Saoirse said. "I think I would have liked her." Legacy. In the years that followed, the people of the Lochmask country would say of Caislean Rua that it had changed without changing, that the old stone was the same stone, the fields the same fields, but that something in the character of the place had shifted as a room shifts when a window long painted shut is finally opened. Saoirse walked the estate as her father had never quite managed, not in inspection, but in conversation, stopping at gates and forges and threshing floors, asking questions and following the answers, learning the land the way she had learned the harbour, by being present in it through all its weathers. She found that the skills that had seemed out of place in her, the ability to read the sky, to judge a distance, to know when something was wrong before she could name what, were not out of place at all. They were simply the same skills applied to different water. The bog and the lough and the mountain above them were as readable as the sea, if you had the patience to learn their language. Nora came every summer. Brother Colum continued to visit once a month until he was 85, and then continued to visit in spirit if not in person, which suited him. Ross sent careful and accurate accounts from the village near Cong, and was gradually, over time, forgiven. Not forgotten, but forgiven, which is the harder and more permanent of the two. Cleodna married a man from Roscommon who had the good sense to be interested in her mind as well as her face, and moved 20 miles away, which was close enough for regular argument and far enough for comfort. Eamon, in the end, lived long enough to see 2 harvests after Saoirse's arrival, and died in the spring of the 3rd year, in the same room where he had spent so many mornings looking at the lough. He left the lough looking as he had found it, and the castle in better hands than it had known in a generation. On the last morning Saoirse sat with him, he was very clear, the clarity that sometimes visits the very old in their final days, like a sky washed clean. "I looked for you for years," he said. "I know. I should have looked harder. You found me eventually, or we found each other. The accounting is even." He smiled. "You are very like your mother." "You've said so," Saoirse said. "I'm beginning to believe it might be true." He closed his eyes. The lough was silver that morning, and very still. In the quiet seasons, Saoirse walked the ramparts at dawn. From the east parapet, she could see, on clear days, the shimmer of the Atlantic far to the west. A silver line at the edge of everything, faint and certain. She could not see Killary Harbour from that distance, or the cliff where Tomas had found her, or the cottage where Nora still kept a candle in the window on stormy nights. But she could feel the direction of it, the way you can feel the direction of home even when it is out of sight. Not behind her, beside her. A life that had not ended but widened. Sometimes Cleodna came to stand beside her on the parapet, her cloak flattening in the wind that came off the mountain. They would stand without speaking for a while, watching the light come in over the lough, until one of them thought of something that needed doing, and they went to do it. There was always something that needed doing. That was the nature of it. And the nature of it, Saoirse had come to understand, was not a burden, but a gift. The proof that what you were tending was alive. The hair ring stayed around her neck. The marble hair sat on the window ledge of her room above the lough, where it caught the morning light and held it for a moment before releasing it into the air. A hair at rest, a hair in motion. The same green stone, the same patient craft, the same hand that had made them both. Decades gone and still present in the curve of the ear, the suggestion of speed contained in the shape of stillness. The lough turned below. The seasons came and went, the castle held. Crioch. The end. Thank you so much for listening to The Lost Heir of Caisleán Rua. I truly hope Saoirse's journey touched your heart, and that you enjoyed this story of family secrets, courage, forgiveness, and finding where one truly belongs. If you enjoyed this clean historical romance audiobook, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps bring more heartfelt Regency romance, Irish love stories, and emotional historical audiobooks to life. Please leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and let me know which moment in the story